Hello and welcome to another edition of Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd and I hope you're all warm and safe somewhere as we try to get through another Nebraska cold snap. We've got another great program for you today as we'll be looking at helping new homeowners decide where to put their hardscapes. We'd also like to give you some tips for houseplant care, and we'll hear about how those plants get from the breeders and growers to your local garden center. But first, we are going to hear from Vaughn Hammond at Kimmel Orchard about some of the new techniques in growing apples. Here's Vaughn to tell us more. I'm here with Vaughn Hammond at Kimmel Orchard and Vineyard, and we are going to be talking about edible landscapes. Vaughn, there is such interest in edible landscapes these days, and a lot of homeowners want them in their own backyard, whether it's rural or residential or urban. And behind me is a really interesting sort of a system that appears to be apples. What exactly is this?
I'm glad you said it looked like some sort of apple, because everybody that we have come through, or oftentimes people are going, what kind of grapes are those? Because they are on a trellis. So these are actually Honeycrisp apples on a dwarf rootstock, and they do look like grapes, but they are apples.
So in describing a trellis system for the homeowner, what are the components? What goes into constructing this sort of a system, and what is the point of using it?
So the trellis system itself is as tall as the trees will get, which is approximately 10 foot. In this situation, we have 25 foot between posts. We have the end post assembly, which is a rather hefty treated timber with a dead man, and what that does is actually supports the weight of the whole trellis system. So 12-foot post, 2 foot into the ground, 10 foot above ground, and then high tensile wire for the wires, and there's 5 of them placed approximately 2 to 2.5 foot between each wire.
If a homeowner wanted to use a trellis system, are there differences in terms of apple spacing or fruit tree spacing? And what about the pests and the pruning practices? Have those changed at all over the years?
Okay, so the spacing traditionally in fruit production, let's talk apples. It's about 15 to 18 foot between trees, sometimes 20 with semi-dwarf trees, and then 20 to 25 foot between rows. For the equipment purposes, that equates to about 187 trees an acre. Today with this system, which by the way is the direction that most of production orchards are going to today, this spacing is 3 to 3.5 foot between trees and about 12 foot between rows, which equates to just a little over 1,000 trees per acre. Absolutely, a homeowner could use this in their landscape situation. A great barrier between neighbors or different areas in your landscape. It could be a shield against something that you might not want to have seen, like a building or compost pile or something along those lines. And as far as maintenance and how that affects the maintenance of the tree, actually maintenance becomes much easier. No longer do you necessarily need a ladder or a chainsaw or a big sprayer to spray the trees. You can actually get by with using a hand pump sprayer for pesticide application, a lopping shears and a hand pruners instead of a chainsaw for pruning. And you don't need a ladder for harvesting. So when you're up on the ladder and you got 40 pounds of apples around your neck, it's not a very pleasant experience. Now you can do it all from the ground. So it's much easier for the homeowner. So
it sounds a lot safer for the homeowner?
A lot safer, absolutely. And no chainsaws when it comes to pruning.
Which is also perfect.
That's right.
So if people were going to do a small little trellis system at home with 3 or 4, 5 trees even, what exactly would be the lifespan for any sort of fruit trees in a home landscape situation?
In this system you're looking at, so with it being a dwarf rootstock, the dwarf rootstock imparts several different characteristics, but one of the characteristics is precocious bearing, which means it will bear fruit at a very young age. It will actually start bearing fruit at 2 years if you'll let it. You want the plant to gain a little bit of energy, so we like to leave them go for 3 or 4 years. But let's say starting harvest at year 3, you can consistently get harvest up to about year 15. And the yields on each of these little trees is between a bushel and a bushel and a half of apples, or 40 to 60 pounds of apples as they mature. You can expect harvest from year 3 to about 15 years. And at that point in time, then they start to peter out a little bit.
So perfect lifespan. This sounds like a great system. We really appreciate your information, Vaughn.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
We've heard from Vaughn about growing peaches, and now we've heard from him about apples. We're really trying to show you the value of growing fruit and that a small orchard can be a great addition to your home. It takes a little effort, as you'll have to be aware of pest problems and you'll have to do some pruning, but there's really nothing like fresh fruit right off the tree. This week's Go Gardening feature for newer gardens takes a look at hardscapes. A hardscape is all of those additions to your yard that aren't actually growing anything, such as a brick patio, retaining walls, fire pits, and any outdoor buildings. It's fine to throw a few lawn chairs on the patio while you barbecue, but some planning, you can really create an area that will be practical and useful for years to come. In our previous Go Gardening sessions, we've talked to you about how to inventory what you have, how to figure out what you want, how to create some conceptual what-if, shoot-the-moon sorts of ideas. It's now time to figure out exactly where some of those elements that really will make your landscape yours go into the landscape. Our tendency as people, if we're plants people, is to move immediately to let's go pick out the plants. But let's take a step back and figure out, now that you know what you want and you need, you've got to figure out where the hardscape elements go. Think of this as circulation systems and as nodes or gathering places, just like you would if you were living in town. You have to use a street or a sidewalk to get to where you're going, and then there is some sort of a feature when you get there. So the hardscape elements can be designed and placed in your landscape in a multitude of ways. People tend to think very rigidly about those sidewalks and those patios, the sidewalk at the street, of course, which typically cannot be changed, but the place where your sidewalk hits that one can. So this is actually exactly the same layout of property. The doors are in the same place, the driveway is in the same place, and if you look at what has happened here, we have 4 different iterations of how to do something as simple as get to the front door, and in a couple of instances, not only get to the front door on a sidewalk of some sort, but to get from the driveway. So we can come from the drive straight into a big patio. We can come in a curvilinear fashion with what is probably some stepping stones or a different kind of material. We can come very close to the driveway with a patio, or we can come kind of straight in a more traditional way. So think about not only the getting to one point from another on a walkable surface in the instance of a residential property, even the driveway. If you've got a bigger property and you have room to curve that drive, narrow it a little bit, figure out where the parking goes, maybe use a dual use of the drive surface if you have company so that it does become sort of an extension of a patio. You also do exactly the same thing on the side yard and in the backyard. So many people really place all of their hardscape elements, patios, fire pits, and so forth, in the backyard. And yet if you're in a neighborhood where you're really good with your neighbors, or you want to be, having even a small element in the front where you can place a couple of chairs, you could have containers, you could have a little tiny table where you could go sit and have your coffee. Those really enhance the experience for your own landscape. They also give you some options so that, you know, depending on where those trees are, depending on how hot it is, or if the wind is blowing, if you want more privacy or less, you have the capability of moving from the front to the back or the back to the front, again, in a method that works for you, either on a very solid hardscape element, very clean, clear path, or one that is a little bit more meandering and a little bit more garden-like. So the true elements that you have to think about are: where are you starting? Where are you going? How are you going to get there? And what are you going to do when you do get there, on what kind of a surface? So we'll be talking a little bit later on in this series about, okay, you've figured out where you're going. Now we're going to figure out what are those materials that you get to work with. In review, we've talked about taking inventory of what you already have, taking notes about what you'd like, and we've summed up how to get where you'd like to be in terms of what's actually outside of your home. A well-planned out hardscape can become a beautiful, peaceful, and functional addition to your home. Next time, we'll be helping you pick out the plants that really make all of this planning for gardeners worthwhile. Since we're all confined to our homes or offices this time of year, it's nice to see something green and growing in the living room or your cubicle. Houseplants can provide a little bit of color in your life when everything else is covered with snow. But like all those other plants, you'll need to pay attention to their care, and that is the topic of this week's landscape lesson. This time of year, a lot of people really need to get a greenhouse fix, or you've got houseplants at home that are maybe looking a little bit peaked. So think about the kinds of conditions that you are giving those houseplants. It's been gray and cloudy, and certainly the ones that need a lot more sun are probably a little bit unhappy. It's also a little bit difficult sometimes to deal with that dry heat in a home. That can also have impact on your houseplants. So what to look for or what to do besides just enjoying it and hoping that we get a little bit of sunshine or going to a real greenhouse? Something like this really simple air plant, which is one of my favorites because I'm terrible with houseplants and even I can't kill this one, but it also sheds parts. So this dried up old dead foliage, in any of your plants, you want to remove that and get rid of it just in case it's insect-based or pest-based or simply doesn't look good. The interesting cylindrical snake plant is looking a little bit peaked, like it probably needs a little bit of fertilization. Houseplants do like to be crowded in the container, a lot of them do. But you can see that we also have what looks an awful lot like some rust starting on the ends of these particular snakes, if you will. So getting rid of those kinds of things also will help keeping those diseases from spreading. Water requirements are going to vary, and of course a lot of our Crassulaceae family plants or our succulents really thrive without much water, but that doesn't mean no water. They also are going to stretch if they don't get enough sun, so the ability to either add artificial light or move them to a sunny window is going to be important. And if you have plants that are showing an awful lot of yellowing foliage in places where it shouldn't be yellow, check for either overwatering, which is very easy to do, or underwatering. Dig down in the base of that plant and figure out, is there something else going on that you really need to attend to if you're going to keep those houseplants healthy. Houseplants are like anything else you grow. You're going to have to inspect them from time to make sure they're thriving. And one of the most common problems with houseplants is overwatering, so do pay special attention to the growing instructions and to the plant itself when you bring it home from the garden center. You know, those plants you purchase at those local garden centers are oftentimes started someplace else. This week's interview focuses on how those plants start as slips and end up on the nursery shelf where you can purchase them and take them home. You know, you might wonder how exactly the plants that you get to buy in the garden centers get to you from wherever they came from. We've talked a little bit this year about sunken gardens, how those plants come to be, but we're really going to talk today about how those containerized plants, the balled and burlapped evergreens, the little bitty things that have to start out life somehow, end up in something you can use in your landscape. So it's my pleasure to be talking with Randy Wolf of Campbell's Nursery and Garden Center about how that happens. So Randy, just exactly how do those little tiny plants come to you from where before they end up being big enough to send out to consumers?
Well, our little tiny plants, we know them as liners in the industry, and they come to us from a myriad of suppliers from all over the United States and even in Canada. These shrub liners that we have here happen to come from Canada, and we received those about 10 days ago in a refrigerated truck. They put 28 in a box and of whatever variety and ship them to us. And And we in turn put them into the appropriate size container. These happen to go into a number 2 or 2 gallon container. We'll start them in a cool greenhouse, grow them slow, try and get some roots on them, and if I do my job correctly and the weather cooperates a little bit, we'll have a saleable plant to come first part of May or end of May. We'll do this with ornamental grasses, we'll do this with shrubs, we'll do this with vines, and of course a lot of different perennials.
What I'm hearing you say is there are various sizes and various ways that they come in, and just exactly how do you know when to bump them or move them up into a bigger container?
We look at the root system, and you're right, we've gotten away from bare root. We do very little bare root anymore. A lot of it is small containers, and some of the containers will actually help produce a nice fibrous root system. You pull that plant out of its container, out of its small pot, and see that nice fibrous root system. We know it's good enough to go into a larger pot. In the larger pot, it's a wait and see. When we start seeing roots getting out to that pot wall, out to the edge of the pot, then we feel like it's close, and probably, depending on variety, could go out into the garden centers or into a landscape.
And then of course that $1 million or at least profit question is, when do you know that they are actually ready in their new containers so that you can take them out of production, put them in the garden center, and allow consumers to actually purchase them and take them home in the pickup truck?
That's the trick. That's the whole scheduling problem, and so you back up a certain number of weeks, and that's when you try and have your product come in. The greenhouses are set at certain temperatures so that they stay on schedule. You just hope you don't have too many cloudy days. Too warm a days can kind of speed the process up. Sometimes not allowing that root system to grow like you'd like it to. Then it requires pinching or trimming some top growth to slow them down. The other thing is we shoot for times when we have a market for them. And obviously spring is one of those times, a major period for us. But we also do landscaping throughout the summer and into the fall, and so we'll want product for those times as well.
Thanks, Randy, for that great information. I know this is a new position for you in what you're doing, and I'm assuming you will be looking forward to spring just like all the rest of us. That's one of the main jobs of a good garden center, which is to offer you a choice of colors, species, and hardy plants that have a good chance of thriving here in Nebraska. And you don't have to wait until April to get started planning for the season. It's time now to answer a few of your questions. If you've got a question you'd like to submit to the show, just drop us an email, byf@unl.edu, and as always, please tell us as much information as you can, including where you live, and attach those pictures as JPEGs. Our first question comes from a viewer who didn't tell us where they're from, but this is a houseplant question, so it's probably less critical than if they were out in the hinterlands asking us about a tree. And this is about a Christmas cactus, which bloomed well at Christmas, or at least close, because of course some of them don't think it's Christmas when it's Christmas, and there's a Thanksgiving version and an Easter version and an oops version sometimes. But what happened with this one is after it flowered, it dropped its flowers and then sort of turned a strange color, and it doesn't really look to us like it is overwatered, which would typically be maybe a little soggier appearance, a little bit more yellow in those pads on that cactus. But it does look dark, almost like it's cold, like maybe it sat in a draft a little bit. Doesn't really look like it needs fertilizing, and typically when those Christmas cactuses finish their flowering, we don't fertilize immediately anyway. They need to go into a resting period. Certainly with a single picture and not a close-up, we can't see insect damage. We can't see any sort of fungal diseases on this cactus either. So the suspicion at this point is maybe it's an environmental thing. Did it get moved? Do check for the watering. Christmas cactus is not one of the cactus that likes it deadly dry, but it's also not one that really can get soaked either. So you're welcome to send additional pictures if you'd like, but best guess at this point is that's maybe something going on with this plant. All right, we have actually a question from a Lincoln viewer who happened to be driving down one of the city streets in their neighborhood and saw trees that looked like the branches had really been stripped in the canopy of the tree. They're newer elms. They're the hybrid elms that are being so popular as a street tree in many, many cities. They were bred oftentimes for certainly resistance to Dutch elm disease, difference in canopy, slightly smaller structure. Some of them have great fall color. They have to be managed when they're young, and that includes a lot of pruning. But this particular instance, this kind of pruning, we don't want to do that. This is one of Dennis's critters that has done all this damage. And for some reason that would be a great PhD sort of research project, the squirrels seem to really be attracted to a lot of these newer hybrid elms. In the winter months, they come in, they strip those branches, and as you can see in the images on this one, they have not only stripped on the top, which we see pretty frequently with squirrels sitting and chewing and doing all that stuff. They have gone almost all the way around a couple of the main trunks on this tree, or the main stems on this tree. When you're down to a strip of bark that's an inch or half or even less than half of the actual diameter of the trunk of the tree, that tree is going to be putting a lot of resources back into compartmentalizing and trying to close that opening. In this instance, there's also a lot of included bark. There's some poor branch attachments in this tree. So I'm going to say that these, at least this particular one with the pictures, is not going to be a tree that is going to be worth putting resources in to save. And the real unfortunate thing is you can't actually just cage an entire tree in the landscape typically. You can put netting over it maybe while it's younger, but that is still not going to deter those squirrels. You cannot move them to a different location. You can't get a license to shoot them as a game animal in town. So it's really sort of that head scratcher on shoot, wish they would have gone off and chewed on somebody else's tree. For our final feature of today's program, we're going to hear from Extension Educator John Porter about planning your garden for this season. Sure, it's been bitterly cold here, but that shouldn't stop you from taking time to think about what you'd like to accomplish outdoors this upcoming growing season. Good gardeners do understand that successful gardening starts with a plan. John tells us that starts right now.
So as we have winter going on and the snow flies and the temperatures are cold, sometimes we think that, well, gardening is just not upon us. But when in the middle of winter, when we have January going on and all those seed catalogs start coming in the mail, is actually the best time to start planning for our garden year ahead. Now, we might think, well, we just go buy what we want and we put it in the ground, and some people do that and they have lovely gardens. But a lot of people, it really helps to plan out your garden year, and there's several different reasons for that. Number one is really knowing when you are getting ready to plant things, what you're going to have ready to plant. So this is especially key if you're starting your own seeds. So when you get your own seeds, you pick up your seed packet, and you never know exactly when to plant it or whenever you need to get things ready to go. So you look at the back of the seed packet and it tells you, do you direct sow? Do you start that indoors? When do you do that? When do you plant it outside? So it's really good to have that information ahead of time and really make a plan when you want to do that so you don't forget. So you look at the seed packet and it says you start indoors 6 weeks before the first or the last frost, and then you plant outdoors. So you can actually take some time to really schedule that out. What I like to do is something like make a garden plan or a garden calendar. So just taking a notebook or some paper and scheduling out when do I have to start this indoors, when can I plant it outdoors, and when is it going to be mature? Because that's another thing that we can think about. We want to think ahead to our gardening, and that's one thing that a lot of people don't do. So I plant this and it's mature in 60 days, and well, I forgot that I scheduled a 2-week vacation in 60 days, so all of that stuff is going to be ripe whenever I'm out of town. So we want to schedule things ahead of time Also thinking about not having everything mature in the vegetable garden at the same time. You know, we have tomatoes that mature in 80 days, 100 days, 120 days. So we can really schedule those things out if we think ahead, if we create a calendar for ourselves. The same thing goes if we're doing landscaping or flowers. If we're starting those seeds indoors, we can schedule that out when we want to plant. If we're wanting to install something new in the landscape, we can plan out how far ahead do I need to start thinking about finding the plants for those. And then just scheduling out and planning out your actual gardening space. So I'm a big garden planner, so I do lots of raised beds, vegetables, so I might actually make myself a chart of what I'm going to plant and maybe even when I'm going to plant it, because I don't plant everything at the same time. I have cool season crops that go in March or April, then I have warm season crops that go in later, and so I schedule that out, I plan that out, and I can make good use of my space, because my beans might be done in July, and what else can I plant in there? So I can really think about making the best use of my space. Then I also have a map of what I planted where for when I need to do crop rotation next year, because I don't want to plant my tomatoes in the same place. I have it mapped out and I remember exactly where they've been for the last few years. So you can get yourself a notebook, a nice journal to use, and to keep all of that information in one place and use it from year to year, and it will help you become a much better gardener just by keeping that information at hand.
A simple plan starts with what was successful last year, as well as what didn't work, and of course what you'd like to try again. And as we've said several times on the program, trying something new can be very rewarding. So get out the catalogs, go to the garden center to look around, and take notes about what you want to do in your garden in 2019. Thank you so much for joining us again for Lifestyle Gardening. Next time we'll be talking about integrated pest management, and we will help gardeners pick out plants for their landscape plan. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So good morning, good gardening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time on Lifestyle Gardening.